Hi everybody. In this video, we're going to finish up our look at the physiognomy of the face and the skull by looking at the physiognomy of the cheeks and the jaws. So first we're going to look at bilateral facial forms of the cheeks. The bilateral view will show you lateral facial curvature, and it can show you that of the forehead, the cheeks, the upper lip, and the chin, which all kind of share a curvature. You can see this from either looking towards the forehead from an inferior view. So this would be an inferior bilateral view. They always say that this is the view that people have approaching a casket for viewing because you tend to approach it from the foot end. That's why it's important to make sure the nose is nice and clean. You can also get a superior bilateral view from looking towards the chin from the superior view. This is the view that you tend to have while you're embalming, and so it tends to be the view that you get for restoration. So looking at the cheekbones, some important aspects of them. You want to look at the amount of prominence, how far they stick out. Do they stick out a long way or not? Are they kind of rounded off? The amount of prominence will also have an impact on the distance, how far they look from each other. Because we have some bilateral facial forms that are kind of based on that, based on how far the cheeks seem to be apart. Now, the cheekbone surface shows change from the frontal plane to the lateral facial plane. Again, the apex of the angle of the zygomatic bone down to the mental tubercles. We're going to see that line again today. Shows you how it changes from the frontal plane to the lateral plane. And as I mentioned, the cheeks, the forehead, the upper lip, and the chin all have a similar lateral curvature. Their curvature from side to side will mimic each other. And as I mentioned, you have, from the bilateral view, you have four basic cheek forms. These are bilateral facial forms. The first one is called oval, and it's the most common. In oval, you have a gentle curvature from the frontal to the lateral plane, so it's not sharp. And if you look at the cheekbones, they will look very close together. So it doesn't look like there's a lot of distance between these two cheekbones. The cheekbones are posterior to the projection of the nose, not very prominent. So they're not going to stick out too much. Now, if you have an oval basic cheek form and you lose a lot of weight, you will end up with maybe an angular basic form, bilateral facial form. So in this, has a very narrow frontal plane. Again, same as the oval, because the cheekbones look close together. It's just you don't have a lot of extra adipose tissue, so you have a large flattened lateral plane. The surfaces will oftentimes show concavities, so kind of sunken in cheeks when you go angular. The next basic bilateral facial form is the round bilateral facial form. It has a very broad frontal plane. These cheeks would look like they were far apart. And he also has a large curved lateral plane. If you lose weight with a round bilateral facial form, you will end up with a square bilateral facial form. The frontal plane of a square bilateral facial form shows very little curvature because you've lost a lot of adipose tissue, but because the cheeks are wide apart, it's very broad. So you have a broad central plane of your face. Again, as they lose weight, you're going to have a very sharp turn from the frontal to the lateral plane of the face, and the lateral plane's not going to have a lot of convexity. It's going to be fairly flat. So the oval and angular kind of match each other. They're based on how far apart the cheekbones look and whether or not you have some adipose tissue or none. Same with round and square. They have very spread out cheekbones. They're further apart, and it depends on the adipose tissue to give you either round or square. Now again, how far apart these cheekbones are can affect how the planes of the cheeks look. So this line that I've talked about numerous times shows you where the change in planes are. So if you draw a line from the prominence of the cheek, which is just kind of lateral and inferior to the lateral corner of the eye, draw that from there to the mental tubercle. It shows you where the front part of the face is, the anterior plane is, and where the lateral planes of the cheeks are. So this is the front of my face here. This is the side of my face. And again, it's important to know where that line is so you make cheeks properly. Now that's the basic line. Now I can draw additional lines to give me more information. So anterior plane convexity. If I draw a line from that prominence of the cheek to the medial lobe of the upper lip, okay, that line is going to show me vertical convexity of my face because the convexity will bend away from that line. So from here, it's going to start bending up, and from that same line go down, it's going to start convexing downward. Again, that's not flat. There's convexity there. But the superiorly, again, it kind of curves superiorly, projecting gradually up into the nose. Inferiorly, it kind of recedes gradually to the side of the chin on the frontal aspect of the face. The lateral convexity is a slight convexity moving medially. So up and down, it's going to curve away from that line. As you go towards the nose, so to speak, from the side of the frontal aspect of the plane, it's going to have a slight convexity moving medially. It's going to also kind of stick out a little bit more because of the horseshoe shape of your alveolar processes. Now, large amounts of adipose tissue can cause a little bit more fullness in that area. Emaciation could create some relative flatness in that area. So if you look at the lateral plane of the face, the lateral plane curvature, you see that where it changes by drawing a line from the prominence of the cheek to the angle of the jaw here. Okay. This just shows you borders. This is the border between the anterior portion of the face and the lateral, and this is the zygomatic arch. So drawing from that prominence of the cheek to the angle of the jaw will show you how this curves. So it's going to, again, curve away from that line. So the superior portion of that curvature, again, you can kind of see it there. The superior portion of that line is going to move laterally towards the zygomatic arch. So it's moving. So once I go above this line, drawn from the prominence of the cheek to the angle of the jaw, it's going to start moving up towards the zygomatic arch. The parotid gland will cause convexity there. Okay, so if you remember, the parotid gland lies above the masseter muscle. It's kind of back here on your jaw. That's why the back of your cheeks don't tend to lose a lot of convexity if you lose a lot of weight. If you look at the inferior portion, oh, I'm sorry, there's the pictures. The inferior portion will move, again, away from that line, but it's curving medially towards the chin. And as it descends, the inferior border of the jawline is going to kind of connect up with the chin. And there's the pictures. So again, you can see this curves away from that line. Superiorly goes up towards the zygomatic arch, inferiorly starts moving towards the chin. Okay, it's important to know where these lines are so that you can tell where the change in direction should start happening. Now the cheeks, the zygomatic bones, also have an impact on kind of how your eye socket looks a little bit. These are what we call the forms of the upper cheek variations. It's influenced by the cheekbone's relationship to the lateral rim of the eye socket. Okay? And we see this by what's called a three-quarter view. So a three-quarter view is when you look directly at someone and then move off to the side about 45 degrees. And you look at the opposite eye. So this is what I'm looking for here. Okay, I'm not looking at the person's right eye, I'm looking at their left eye. Okay, so I'll move to my left and look at their left eye, and I'm seeing how the cheek relates to the upper rim of the eye socket. Okay, so what should be there is a little dip. That's the normal cheek variation. The lateral rim of the eye socket dips concavely between the forehead and the cheekbone. So there should be a little dip. And again, that makes sense because the lateral corner of your eye is on your temple. So if I'm in a three-quarter view, I shouldn't be able to see the lateral corner of your eye. The flat version of this is when there is no dip. There is no concavity between the rim of the eye socket and the cheek. This is usually caused by the upper rim of the eye socket projecting a little bit further out than it should. What this results in is the cheek being less prominent. So you won't see a concavity. Concave. The concave upper cheek form is when you have cheeks that are overly prominent. Chrissy Teigen, if you know who that is, she has very high cheekbones. She would probably have a concave upper cheek variation if looking from the three-quarter view. And it's important to know these different variations and to look for them so that you can form the skull properly. A lot of times people make their wax heads and they only kind of do it from the maybe profile and direct view, but the three-quarter view and bilateral views help to show you proper curvature of things. You have to remember you're making a three-dimensional object. It's not supposed to look good just from one angle, but from many angles. So that finishes it up for the physiognomy of the cheek. We're going to now look at the physiognomy of the jaw. So the angle of the jaw is responsible for a couple of things. It will help to form the frontal head shape, okay, and as does the cheeks and the forehead. That's where you get your skull shapes from. It will also impact how the person's face looks from the profile. So if I have a short ramus, my jaw is going to go straight down to my chin. If I have a longer ramus, it's going to be a little bit more towards 90. So we're going to look at the different types of jaw lines. There are 4 of them, and we're going to run from the angle that is the most obtuse, so the one that is more further away from 90 degrees, moving to the jawline that is closer to 90 degrees. So the first one is the narrow jawline. From the lateral aspect, this is the most obtuse angle. So if it was a flat line, that would be 180. And because this person's ramus is very short, it looks like almost a straight line going up. Okay, there's no angle to it. Because this is a very short ramus, it looks like it's very close to the ear, where the angle of the jaw would be. From the frontal aspect, your jawline is going to narrow very quickly to the chin. This is most often accompanied by a receding chin, so a chin that doesn't stick out. So moving from the narrow, which has the most obtuse angle, the next one that has the next most obtuse, I guess you could say, is the curving jawline. From looking at it from the side, it has a little bit longer ramus, so the angle of the jaw is less obtuse, so it's growing closer to 90 than the narrow jawline. The posterior margin of the jaw tends to be a little bit longer than a narrow jaw, and again, that has to do with the ramus being a little bit longer. The inferior margin doesn't descend to the chin as abruptly. It is slightly longer than the posterior margin, so they're almost half and half. From the frontal aspect, you'll get more of a chin here, but it's a kind of a gentle curve to the chin. So it's not a straight line like the narrow, it's more of a gentle curve because the ramus is getting longer, giving you more of a full lower face. The next one that is getting, again, closer to 90 as we go is the angular jaw. The angular jaw, there it is, from the lateral aspect, has more of an angle that is more obtuse than square jaw. Well, that just means it's not quite 90, but it's getting there. The posterior margin is a little bit shorter than the square jaw, which we're going to see. The frontal aspect here, jawline appears to be more angular. Again, it's getting a longer ramus. You can see here. Okay, and the jawline appears very angular. The distance between the angles is not as wide as a square jaw, but they are getting longer. The ramus is getting longer. The last one that is closest to 90 is the square jaw. So the lateral aspect, the angle approaches 90. It has a very, very long ramus. Both the posterior and inferior margins are very long with the square jaw. Oftentimes the inferior margin is slightly inclined to go down to the jaw. From the frontal aspect, the angles of the jaw look like they're right next to the chin, or right just superior, I guess is the best way to put it. So that where that angle of the jaw is almost on the same uh, horizontal plane, if you will, as the top of the chin. Okay, so that finishes it up with physiognomy of the face and skull. In the next video, we're going to cover the use of pictures and facial proportions.